To get featured on a music podcast, artists need a well-thought-out strategy that involves targeting the right podcasts, crafting compelling pitches, and being available for interviews. Here's a detailed, data-driven approach to getting on a music podcast. 1. Identify the right podcasts. Target genre-specific podcasts. Start by identifying podcasts that feature artists in your genre or cover topics relevant to your career. According to a 2023 survey by Podcasters Network, 63% of podcasts that feature independent artists focus on specific music genres or niche topics. Genre-specific podcasts are 2x more likely to feature emerging artists than general music podcasts. Listener demographics. Look for podcasts with audiences that align with your target listeners. A report from Music Podcast Analytics found that 40% of music podcast listeners actively search for new music through podcasts. The right podcast can introduce you to new fans who are highly engaged with discovering new artists. Podcast popularity. Keep in mind that the size of a podcast matters less than its relevance. Smaller podcasts with 500, 1,000 dedicated listeners can still significantly boost your exposure. These podcasts often feature 50% more independent artists than larger shows, and their listeners are more likely to engage directly with the artist on social media. 2. Create an engaging pitch craft. A personalized pitch. Your pitch should be tailored to the specific podcast you're reaching out to. Data from Podnews suggests that 73% of podcast hosts prefer pitches that mention specific episodes or topics covered in the past. This shows you've done your homework and are genuinely interested in the show. Generic or copy-pasted pitches are 4x less likely to receive a response. Bio and achievements. Include a brief bio highlighting your career and any notable achievements such as recent releases, tours, or awards. A strong bio can increase your chances of being considered by 25%, especially if you have upcoming projects that tie into current music trends or industry conversations. Tailor to podcast themes. Explain why you would be an interesting guest based on the podcast's themes or typical content. If the podcast focuses on the creative process, mention your unique approach to songwriting or production. Podcasts looking for industry insights are more likely to feature guests who offer unique perspectives, such as 42% of podcasts that target indie music topics. 3. Be available for interviews. Flexible scheduling. Podcast hosts often schedule interviews well in advance. According to data from Podcast Industry Trends, 65% of podcasts book interviews 2 to 4 weeks ahead of time, and flexible availability from artists increases the likelihood of being featured. Being proactive and suggesting a few possible time slots can set you apart from other artists who may have more rigid schedules. Respect the podcast's format. Some podcasts may require you to record remotely or in person, and being adaptable can make the process easier for the host. Remote interviews have become increasingly popular, with 80% of podcasts recording digitally, according to 2022 data from Podfinder. 4. Offer a unique story or insight stand out with a unique angle. Podcasts thrive on engaging content, so sharing a distinctive story or perspective is key. Whether it's a behind-the-scenes look at your creative process, a unique tour experience, or overcoming challenges in the industry, offering something memorable increases your chances of being featured. In fact, 61% of podcast hosts surveyed by Podcast Host Directory said they prioritize guests who bring new and unique insights. Insight into the industry. Many music podcasts focus on the business side of the industry. Sharing insights or expertise on topics like indie music promotion, navigating streaming platforms, or DIY touring can make you a valuable guest. According to a 2023 music industry podcast report, 48% of music podcasts actively seek guests who can offer actionable advice to their listeners. 5. Leverage your network recommendations from peers. Leveraging personal connections can increase your chances of landing a podcast spot. According to a 2022 survey from Podcast Booking Services, 40% of podcast hosts are more likely to book guests who are referred by past guests or industry peers. If you know someone who's been featured on a podcast, ask for an introduction or recommendation. Collaborate with publicists. If you work with a publicist, they can often pitch you directly to podcasts. Publicists report that podcasts are becoming a more prominent part of music promotion campaigns, with over 70% of publicists including podcast placements as part of their artist strategy, according to a 2023 report by Music Publicist Weekly. Additional stats and insights: podcast growth. The podcasting medium is growing rapidly. There are over 2 million podcasts globally, with music-related podcasts accounting for roughly 15% of all available shows, according to a 2022 report from Podcast Insights. Engaged audiences. A 2023 study by Edison Research found that 56% of podcast listeners are more likely to engage with an artist on social media after hearing them on a podcast. This direct engagement can be more impactful than traditional media coverage, as podcast listeners often feel a deeper connection with the guests they hear. Cross-promotion benefits. Podcasts that promote their episodes on social media see a 25% increase in listener engagement, according to 2023 data from Podmetrics. When you're featured on a podcast, sharing the episode with your own audience can boost visibility and create more opportunities for collaborations. In conclusion, getting featured on a music podcast involves researching the right shows, crafting engaging and personalized pitches, and offering flexible availability for interviews. By presenting a unique story or industry insight and leveraging your network for introductions, you can increase your chances of securing podcast spots that align with your music career and audience. Podcasts provide a valuable platform for independent artists, offering both exposure and a chance to build deeper connections with listeners.